The Sixth Amendment is a part of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. They're very important issues, and they were important to our founding fathers because of the struggle they went through with the British. It's a lot easier to see yourself owning a gun than finding yourself as an indigent defendant. I think that is the problem.
In Idaho, I think we've been had kind of a tenure of, we're going to punish you. We're going to the maximum. And by revisiting those crimes, what's listed, I think that would help lighten the load and be able to deal with them as an infraction, and maybe even more administratively would definitely be appropriate and would provide more time available for the public defender on misdemeanors and felonies.
So I think our probation is way more difficult for our clients to be successful at. And I almost see that we're setting some of these people up for failure in that probation system. Because again, a comparison, Washington has guideline sentencing, Idaho does not. So the public defenders in Washington are representing that person for the 1 year on probation. The public defenders in Idaho are representing that person for 5 or 7 years on probation. So there's a significant difference between the penalties and how the Department of Corrections in both states are approaching it.
Well, the legislature believes that these decisions are made better at the local level, and I think what they're talking about is making the hiring decisions better able to serve the community. But the problem is that this is not a local issue. This really is a state and federal constitutional issue. The locals have to deal the hand that's dealt them. They have to use the tools that they're given. They have to make sure that they're going to hire the right people, the well-qualified people, but the commissioners don't always have those skills. So they have all the responsibility and absolutely no authority here.
So you have the folks that are like, no, we still want control. Get them in at the table and find out what means a lot to you. Why do you want that control? What can we do to work together so that your people's needs are met as well as your Clark counties or your Lewis counties? I think in order for a statewide blanket system to work, I think it's imperative that those players are at the table. So you do have a top-down, and this is a statewide system, but you have to have the input and work together in order to make it successful.
Thanks so much for joining us this week. Eric, I wanted to start with you. 7 years later, what is the state of public defense in Idaho?
Well, in 2014, the Public Defense Commission was created. Since then, we've been able to infuse, I think it was $11 million this year for workload money into the counties. We have 36 workload attorneys that were added to the counties, and we have the 10 principles of public defense. So we have a significant improvement in public defense over the last 7 years.
How does that compare to other states?
Idaho's really been a pioneer with public defense. The case we hear about is Gideon versus Wainwright. That was 1963. Idaho actually provided the right to counsel as early as 1923. So we're 40 years ahead. The 10 principles, we've been able to, over the last 7 years, supplement those, and I think we're one of the first states to actually do that for public defense.
No, but there still have been some county-to-county issues. Seth, I want to bring you into the conversation. Can you explain how House Bill 735 addresses that issue and how it shifts funding?
Yeah, so counties, if we go back to prior to 2014 when the Public Defense Commission was created, counties were the exclusive provider and payer of indigent public defense in Idaho. And at that time, counties were spending roughly $21 million a year on public defense-related expenditures. You fast forward to today, and between the state dollars that are coming in and the county money that's spent, it's upwards of $45 million that are spent annually on public defense. And for the counties, their share of that, varies depending on the cases and the amount of workload to be done, but it's between $33 and $35 million a year that largely is funded by property taxes. This bill is significant because it creates a dedicated non-property tax funding source for public defense in Idaho. And so we will see counties moving forward reduce their property tax budgets to account for these new dollars coming in. And so over the next 2 years, instead of property taxpayers paying for it, there will be a sales tax distribution to counties that will provide the funding to counties. Now, the impact will vary county to county. In some counties, there isn't as much population, there's not as much workload, and so there won't be as much of a property tax reduction there. But in larger counties like Ada County, there will be upwards of a $9 million reduction in property taxes, which if you look statewide, the average is between 5 and 6% a year in property tax savings, which for Idahoans who are struggling with rising property values and inflation and other factors, that's a significant reduction of county property taxes. And so we have long been exploring ways to provide property tax relief here in Idaho. And this is really the first bill that provides direct property tax relief to Idahoans. But in addition to that, it fixes a really important problem with how public defense is funded in Idaho.
And I want to circle back around to property taxes because that's been such an important topic for so many Idahoans. But while we're still on the public defense part of this, what does this change mean for the public defenders themselves?
Well, I think we're going to continue to have an improvement in public defense. We'll have more consistent training throughout the state. We don't know what the system is going to look like yet, but we are going to have state oversight. The state's responsible for providing public defense. So we will have state oversight, we'll still have standards, and more consistent training throughout the state.
Do you think it will improve the quality of defense that defendants receive?
Absolutely. That's the goal, and that's been the goal of the legislature and the governor's office for the last 7-8 years. And quite frankly, since the beginning, Idaho's always been in front with public defense. The question that Seth and I are going to need to talk about, and it's something the governor's office is going to work on, is putting together a working group for public defense. And so a group of experts that can decide what Idaho should look like. We know what other states have done statewide, but Idaho's unique, and we're going to do it our way. And we're going to have an improvement in public defense throughout the state.
Can you talk about the changes to Capitol Defense? Because the majority of the workload for public defenders is what we talked about earlier in the show, right? The criminal and some civil issues, but for the most part, or criminal, sorry, but a very small percentage of those are Capitol Defense. Can you talk about those changes?
Absolutely, that's an excellent question. So Capitol Defense is unique, and you'll always hear people say death is different, because death is different. It's final once the case is over, and so the goal is to have 2 attorneys on those cases. You have a mitigation expert, you have an investigator. The problem is in some of these smaller counties, you don't necessarily have access to 2 Capitol Defense attorneys, and so as we develop the system, there are a number of different options to deal with that. But one thing you can do is you can have a Capitol team or a Capitol unit that travels around the state for these smaller counties in the event that these issues arise.
And that requires special training. It's not the same kind of training that most public defenders receive.
Absolutely. So with capital cases, most of the training is done out of state because that's where the majority of the experts are for capital defense. And the attorneys have to do 12 credits of CLEs every couple of years to be qualified to do capital cases. So,
I think an important point that Eric made is the impact that it has on rural counties. You look at a county like Fremont County right now that's dealing with a significant murder case with 2 defendants, and they're going through process right now, but that is very expensive for a small county like Fremont County to handle, and we see that time in and time again around the state where a small county will deal with a capital case. And going back into the 90s, that's why the legislature and counties created the Capital Crimes Defense Fund, because without that assistance, you have the potential of bankrupting a really small county. And so this really will provide significant relief and help for our rural counties across the state.
And what is that Capital Defense Fund?
So the legislature created the Capital Crimes Defense Fund, and think of it almost as an insurance program, essentially, where each county is required, or they're not required, but there are some incentives in statute for counties to participate in the Capital Crimes Defense Fund. So every county in the state annually contributes to this fund. And when there is a capital case, the fund itself will cover half of you're required to have 2 defense attorneys, we pay for half of that. The other benefit that it provides to the counties, and this is where the real cost savings comes in, is that any appellate work that's done post-conviction is all done by the state appellate public defender's office, which is a significant savings to counties, and that's really the reason and the motivation for counties to participate.
And you brought up an important point that I want to touch on about how these counties are so different. You know, of the 44 counties in Idaho, we have everything from Ada County to Clark County that has fewer than 1,000 people living there. Will this change from House Bill 735 help every county equally, or are there some that benefit more than others?
You know, that's a really good question, Melissa. If you can look at it, I guess, from 2 standpoints. One, you've got a service that's provided by the county. And certainly the rural counties, I would argue, stand to gain the most from House Bill 735 from a service perspective. Those are the counties that struggle to contract for attorneys or hire attorneys, so they don't have the pool to pull from. And so this will markedly improve public defense in those rural communities. If you look at it from a perspective of a property taxpayer and the savings that a property taxpayer will see, you're probably going to see more of a savings in the urban areas of the state, which tend to spend more on public defense and other services. And so it really depends on how you look at it. But from a taxpayer standpoint, and I live here in Ada County, I'm certainly going to see that on my tax notice this next year, as will all the other residents of Ada County. And so that's I think the beauty of this bill is that it helps the taxpayer, but it also helps the state and counties in solving a really important policy issue.
From the taxpayer perspective, is it enough property tax relief?
That's something that policymakers have been debating for the last few years. And the legislature, dating back to last year, have made a number of significant changes with House Bill 389 last year that imposes additional budget caps. This session, this was the only real significant property tax relief bill. And again, if you look at it from your county tax bill, for example, when you get your tax notice, you'll see a number of line items. You'll see the county, the city, special purpose districts. And what this will do, if in fact each county you see that savings, your tax bill that you pay to the counties will go down 5 to 6%. Now, the county is going to raise their budget potentially up to 3% under the current budget law, but that's less than the savings, and so you should see a net decrease in the county property taxes you pay. But that's only a fraction of the total tax bill. If you look at the average tax bill in Idaho, about a quarter of that is to the county. The other 3/4 goes to these other taxing districts. And so you're going to see property taxes increase as a result of that. And we're hopeful that the legislature will continue to look at ways to provide meaningful property tax relief. And we think this bill serves as a very good model for that. To really take a look at what are the essential mandated services that locals have to provide and come up with a dedicated funding source for those services so that we can save taxpayers. Because really at the county level, we don't have a lot of options because much of what we do is statutorily required of us. And so it's a question of, do you raise property taxes to pay for that, or is there an alternative funding source that could be used? Another one of the items that we've been talking with legislators about for the last several years is to simply grant counties the authority to provide property tax relief by giving us other authorities, for example, a local option sales tax that could be used to raise the sales tax within a community, but then dedicate those sales tax revenues to reducing the property tax burden on taxpayers.
We've talked a lot about the legislative side of addressing public defense issues. There is also a lawsuit, Tucker v. Idaho, that alleged that Idaho's public defense system was inadequate. Eric, you are a party to that lawsuit. You inherited that with your job that you were appointed to in 2016. Can you give us an update on where that case is?
I can tell you it's set for trial coming up the spring of 2023, and that's about it. The Public Defense Commission continues to work on improving public defense. while we're in the process of developing this new system. So,
What needs to happen next?
well, I think we're going to sit down this summer, and the governor's office is going to put together a working group of experts to identify the issues that, because Idaho is so difficult, like we've been talking about today, we have big counties and small counties with only a handful of cases. And so developing a system will take some time, but that's what we're going to work on this summer and hopefully have something for the legislature this next year.
All right. Eric Frederickson, Idaho State Appellate Public Defender, and Seth Grigg, Idaho Association of Counties Executive Director. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Melissa.
Melissa.